A violent summer storm tore across the Kansas plains, wind howling through empty fields like ghosts of forgotten harvests. Daniel Brooks walked through it as if he belonged to the ruin it carried. At 40, he was a tall, broad-shouldered man worn down by years of labor and one devastating betrayal. His dark hair, once neatly kept, now clung wet and unkempt to his forehead, streaked faintly with gray. A rough beard shadowed his sharp jawline, and deep lines carved around pale blue eyes that had seen too much loss too quickly. There was a quiet strength in him, but it had been fractured, shaken by the moment he realized the land his father left him had been taken through deceit, a forged contract he never fully understood until it was too late. Since then, Daniel had spoken little, trusting even less, carrying himself like a man who had lost not just a home, but a purpose. Beside him moved Max, a 3-year-old German shepherd with a thick black and tan coat now soaked and clinging to his muscular frame. His amber eyes remained alert despite exhaustion, fixed constantly on Daniel as if guarding what little remained of his world. Max walked close, almost brushing Daniel's leg with every step, loyal not out of training, but devotion. He had been there through the long nights, the arguments, the silence after everything fell apart. Rain soaked through Daniel's worn jacket as thunder cracked overhead. Each step felt heavier than the last, not from distance, but from the weight of knowing there was nowhere left to go. The road stretched empty behind him, and ahead, nothing but darkness and wind. He had never felt smaller. Then, through sheets of rain, a faint light flickered. A small wooden house stood at the edge of the road, its porch dimly lit, fragile against the storm. Daniel hesitated. Pride, stubborn and familiar, told him to keep walking. But the cold had already begun to seep into his bones, and Max's slowed pace said what Daniel would not admit. He stepped forward and knocked. The door opened slowly. Emily Carter stood there, 32 years old, slender and slightly taller than average, with soft but defined features shaped by both kindness and quiet resilience. Her chestnut brown hair was loosely tied back, strands escaping in the humidity, framing a face that held both warmth and caution. Her hazel eyes studied Daniel carefully, not with fear, but with the practiced awareness of someone who had lived alone long enough to trust her instincts more than her comfort. Years of loss had taught her to be careful, but not cruel. Her gaze dropped briefly to Max, who stood trembling yet calm, then back to Daniel. Rain dripped from the brim of his worn hat. He didn't speak at first. Words felt too heavy, too unnecessary. "Storm's bad," he finally said, voice low and rough. "Just need somewhere to wait it out." Silence stretched between them, thin as thread. Emily's hand rested lightly against the doorframe. She could see everything he didn't say. The exhaustion, the pride barely holding together, the kind of quiet desperation that didn't beg, but endured. She knew that look. She had worn it once. Another thunderclap split the sky. She stepped aside. "Come in," she said. Not because she trusted him, but because she remembered what it felt like when no one did. The storm deepened through the night, rain striking the wooden roof in relentless waves, as if the sky itself refused to rest. Daniel barely made it 3 steps inside before his strength gave way. His knees buckled, not dramatically, but quietly, like a man who had been holding himself together for too long and simply could not anymore. Emily moved fast, catching his arm despite the weight of him, surprised at how solid he still felt beneath the soaked fabric. Up close, she noticed the tremor in his hands, the unnatural heat rising from his skin, the dull, unfocused glaze in his pale eyes. This wasn't just exhaustion, it was fever already taking hold. "Sit," she said firmly, her voice calm but leaving no room for argument. Daniel didn't resist. He didn't have the strength left to pretend. She guided him to a worn couch near the stone fireplace, a place that carried the quiet history of her home, simple, functional, but carefully kept. With practiced movements, she pulled off his soaked jacket and boots, setting them aside without hesitation. There was no embarrassment in her actions, only efficiency shaped by years of surviving alone. She had learned long ago that kindness was not always gentle. It was often practical. Max followed closely, his paws silent on the wooden floor, water dripping from his coat. Up close, his size was more striking, his broad chest and strong limbs hinting at both power and restraint. Yet his behavior was entirely controlled. He positioned himself beside Daniel, lowering his body but keeping his head raised, amber eyes fixed on Emily, not threatening, but watchful. measuring her intent. He trusted slowly, but once given, that trust ran deep. Emily noticed the look and met it without fear. "He's safe," she said softly, more to the dog than the man. Something in her tone, steady, grounded, seemed to reach him. Max's ears relaxed slightly, though he did not fully let his guard down. Daniel's breathing grew uneven as the fever climbed. His face flushed beneath the rough stubble, and his body shivered despite the heat radiating from him. Emily moved to the fireplace, kneeling with quiet familiarity as she fed dry wood into the embers. Flames caught quickly, casting a warm, flickering glow that pushed back the shadows pressing in from every corner of the room. The storm still roared outside, but inside, the space began to feel contained, protected, like a fragile island against chaos. She returned with a thick blanket, draping it over Daniel, then disappeared briefly into the kitchen. When she came back, she carried a basin of warm water and a clean cloth. Without ceremony, she sat beside him and pressed the damp cloth gently against his forehead. His skin was burning. In his half-conscious state, Daniel murmured. At first the words were indistinct, broken fragments slipping through clenched teeth, then clearer. "The Northfield, don't sign it. Not that one." Emily stilled slightly, her hand pausing mid-motion. She wasn't trying to listen, but the pain in his voice carried weight. This wasn't just illness speaking. It was memory, raw, unresolved. "My father built it. I didn't know." "I didn't know." The words cracked at the edges, as if they were cutting him from the inside. Max shifted closer, resting his head lightly against Daniel's arm, a silent anchor in the storm of his mind. Emily resumed her movement, slower now, more deliberate. She didn't ask questions. She had learned that some truths surfaced only when they were ready, and forcing them only pushed them deeper. Instead, she focused on what she could do, cooling the fever, steadying his breathing, keeping him here. Outside, lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that shook the windows. Inside, the fire burned steady. Hours passed unnoticed. The rhythm of the storm softened gradually, from violent bursts to steady rain, then to a distant murmur rolling across the plains. Emily remained where she was, her back straight despite the fatigue settling into her shoulders, her hand returning again and again to Daniel's forehead, checking, adjusting, staying. At some point, his breathing changed, slower, deeper. The tension in his face eased, if only slightly. Max noticed it first, his posture lowered, the rigid alertness melting into quiet vigilance. He let out a low breath, almost a sigh, before settling more fully beside Daniel, his body still close enough to touch. Emily leaned back slightly, studying the man in front of her. Without the strain of movement, he looked older, but also clearer. Not broken, she realized, just wounded in a way that hadn't been allowed to heal. She glanced toward the window. The storm had nearly passed. Inside the small house, the fire crackled softly, steady and alive, and for the first time that night, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt like something had begun. Morning arrived gently, sunlight slipping through thin curtains and settling across the wooden floor like a quiet promise. Daniel woke to the smell of something warm, simple food, nothing fancy, but steady and real. For a moment, he didn't move. He wasn't sure where he was, only that the ache in his bones had softened and the pounding in his head had faded to a dull echo. Then memory returned, not all at once, but in pieces. The storm, the door, the woman. He turned his head slightly. Max lay stretched along the floor nearby, his large body relaxed in a way Daniel hadn't seen in days. The dog's ears twitched at the smallest sound, but he didn't rise, only opened one eye briefly, confirming Daniel was awake before settling again. It was the first time since everything had fallen apart that Max had allowed himself to rest so fully. Daniel pushed himself upright slowly, muscles stiff but responsive. Across the room, Emily stood by a small cast-iron stove, her back partially turned as she stirred a pot with steady, unhurried movements. In the morning light, her features appeared softer but no less defined. Her posture straight, her motions efficient, as if every action had purpose. She wore a simple, faded dress, sleeves rolled slightly, revealing forearms marked not by softness but by quiet strength. She wasn't fragile. She was someone who endured. "You're awake," she said without turning, her voice calm, almost matter of fact. "That's a good sign." Daniel cleared his throat, his voice still rough. Didn't think I would be. She glanced over her shoulder then, her hazel eyes meeting his, studying him, not with curiosity but with quiet assessment. You will, she said. People don't break as easy as they think. He gave a faint, humorless exhale. Some do. Emily didn't argue. She turned back to the stove and poured the contents into a bowl before setting it on the table. Eat first. Talk later. Daniel stood, slower this time, but steadier. Max rose immediately, stretching his limbs before walking beside him, brushing lightly against his leg. A silent check, a habit born from loyalty. Together, they moved toward the table. The first few minutes passed in silence, broken only by the sound of a spoon against ceramic. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It wasn't empty. It waited. Daniel set the spoon down, his fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the table. It was my father's, he said without looking up. The land. Emily sat across from him, her hands folded loosely, listening. He built everything from nothing, Daniel continued, voice low but steady. Took years. I grew up there. Every fence, every field. I knew it. He paused, jaw tightening. Then one man shows up with papers, talks fast, makes it sound simple, said it was a partnership. Expansion. I didn't read enough, didn't question enough. His eyes finally lifted, something sharper behind them now. By the time I understood, it was already signed away. Emily didn't interrupt. She had learned long ago that when people spoke about loss, they weren't asking for answers. They were asking to be heard. He didn't just take the land, Daniel added quietly. He took the way people looked at me after, like I'd failed something bigger than myself. Max rested his head lightly on Daniel's knee, grounding him in the present. Emily leaned back slightly, her gaze drifting for a moment toward the window before returning. I know that look, she said. Not the land, but the loss. Daniel watched her now. My parents died when I was young, she continued, her tone even but not distant. After that, I trusted the wrong man, thought I was building something steady. A faint pause. He left when things got hard, took what little we had, and disappeared. She gave a small shrug, but there was no bitterness in it, only acceptance shaped by time. After that, I stopped expecting people to stay. Silence followed, but it wasn't heavy. Daniel studied her in a way he hadn't allowed himself to study anyone in a long time. Not for weakness, but for truth. She wasn't offering sympathy. She was offering understanding. You still let me in, he said. Emily met his gaze, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching the corner of her lips. I didn't let you in, she said. I just didn't shut the door. For the first time, something close to a real expression crossed Daniel's face. Not quite a smile, but something softer than the guarded lines he had carried. Max shifted between them, lowering himself onto the floor, his presence anchoring the space. Outside, the world had been washed clean by the storm. Inside, something quieter was beginning to take shape. Not trust, not yet, but the space where it might grow. And neither of them turned away from it. The days after the storm unfolded with a quiet purpose, as if the land itself had decided to give them one more chance. Daniel did not speak of leaving anymore. Instead, he worked. From sunrise to the long golden stretch of evening, his hands returned to what they had always known, repairing, rebuilding, restoring. The fence behind Emily's house had leaned for years, its posts crooked and wires sagging, but under Daniel's steady grip, it began to stand straight again. His movements were precise, efficient, shaped by a lifetime of doing rather than explaining. There was no hesitation in him when it came to work, only when it came to people. Max followed him like a shadow reborn, his coat now dry and thick again, catching the sunlight in shades of deep black and warm brown. His posture had changed too. He no longer carried the tight vigilance of a hunted animal. Instead, he moved with controlled confidence, often positioning himself where he could see both Daniel and the open road at once. Not anxious, prepared. He had accepted this place, but he had not forgotten the world beyond it. Inside the house, Emily worked with a different kind of focus. Papers lay spread across the wooden table, worn, creased, some nearly torn at the edges. She studied them with narrowed eyes, her fingers tracing signatures, dates, clauses. She wasn't formally trained as a lawyer, but she had something just as valuable: patience sharpened by years of having to understand things no one explained to her. "This doesn't line up," she said one afternoon, her voice cutting clean through the quiet. Daniel stepped inside, wiping dirt from his hands with a cloth, his brow slightly furrowed. "What doesn't?" Emily tapped a section of the document. "The transfer date and the notarization, they're too close. Same day." She looked up at him, her hazel eyes sharper now. "That's not how it usually works. Not in rural filings like this." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You saying it's fake?" "I'm saying it's rushed," she replied. "And people rush when they don't want something examined too closely." Hope was a dangerous thing. Daniel felt it rise anyway, slow and uncertain, like something he didn't quite trust yet. Emily leaned back, exhaling quietly. "I know someone who might look at this properly." Daniel crossed his arms slightly, instinctive caution surfacing. "A lawyer?" She nodded. "Old family friend. Haven't spoken to him in years." A brief pause flickered across her expression. Not fear, but hesitation rooted in memory. "Name's Robert Hayes." She stood, moving toward a small drawer and pulling out a folded piece of paper. "He's in the next town over. Used to be," she searched for the right word, "the kind of man who didn't let things slide." Daniel studied her. "And now?" Emily gave a faint, almost wry smile. "Now he's older, probably more tired, but still honest." The name lingered between them like a door not yet opened. Robert Hayes had once been known across 3 counties as a man who built his reputation not on charm but on precision. In his late 60s now, with thinning silver hair and a narrow, angular face marked by years of stern decisions, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had seen too many truths twisted, and refused to let them stay that way. People said he had stepped back from most cases after his wife passed, something in him softening, or perhaps simply wearing down. "Think he'll help?" Daniel asked. Emily folded the paper again, slower this time. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I know he'll tell the truth." That, Daniel realized, was more than most people offered. The following morning they prepared to go, not with urgency but with intention. Daniel cleaned up as best he could, his beard trimmed slightly, his shirt replaced with one Emily had insisted he take. Simple, but clean. He resisted at first, but she didn't argue. She just left it there until he used it. Max stood by the door before either of them moved, already aware of the shift in the air. His ears were forward, his body steady. Whatever came next, he would be part of it. Emily stepped onto the porch, the sunlight stretching wide across the open land, no longer hostile, but watchful. Daniel followed, pausing for a brief second as his gaze swept the horizon. Somewhere beyond that line lay everything he had lost, and maybe, just maybe, something he could still reclaim. He stepped forward, not alone. The morning of the hearing arrived sharp and cold, the kind of quiet that settles before something irreversible. Daniel stood outside the small county courthouse, his posture straight but his hands still for once. He wore the same clean shirt Emily had given him, sleeves buttoned, collar slightly stiff against his neck, as if even the fabric wasn't used to seeing him like this. His beard was trimmed closer now, revealing the sharper lines of his jaw, and though the weariness in his pale blue eyes had not disappeared, it had changed, less hollow, more focused. Beside him, Max stood tall and alert, his thick coat brushed clean, his presence steady as stone. People passed them with brief glances, some curious, some indifferent, but Max's gaze never wavered. He watched the world the way he always had, carefully, faithfully, as if guarding not just Daniel, but the fragile future standing beside him. Emily stepped up next to him, her expression calm, though her fingers tightened slightly around the folder she carried. She wore a simple, pale dress, her hair tied back neatly, but there was a quiet strength in her stance that made her seem taller than she was. She had chosen to stand here, not behind him, not apart from him, but beside him. Inside, the courtroom was small, worn with years of decisions that had shaped lives in ways no one outside those walls would ever fully understand. At the far end stood the man who had taken Daniel's land, Victor Langley. He was in his early 50s, tall but slightly stooped, as if the weight he carried was not physical, but built from years of calculated choices. His slicked back dark hair showed streaks of gray at the temples, and his clean-shaven face held a permanent half-smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He dressed well, too well for a rural town, his tailored suit sharp against the modest room, his posture relaxed in a way that suggested he believed he had already won. Victor was known for that confidence. Years ago, he had been a legitimate businessman, but a failed investment and the humiliation that followed had reshaped him into someone who valued control over fairness. Since then, he had built his success quietly, not by creating, but by taking. Robert Hayes sat at the front, papers arranged with exact precision. Age had not softened him as much as it had refined him. His sharp eyes moved quickly, absorbing every detail, every movement, every shift in tone. When Daniel and Emily approached, Robert gave a single nod, not warm, but steady. It was enough. The hearing began without ceremony. Victor's voice carried smoothly as he presented the contract, speaking as though the matter were already settled. But Robert did not interrupt. He waited. He listened. And when it was his turn, he rose slowly, adjusting his glasses with a measured hand. "The issue is not whether a contract exists," Robert said, his voice calm but firm. "It is whether that contract was executed with lawful clarity and fair representation." He laid the documents out one by one, each detail placed like a stone building something immovable. The mismatched dates, the rushed notarization, the absence of proper witness verification, small things, individually dismissible, but together undeniable. Victor's smile faltered just slightly. For the first time, Daniel felt something shift, not outside, but inside himself. Not hope. Something steadier than that. Truth. The room grew quieter as the judge reviewed the evidence. Minutes stretched longer than they should have, each second pressing against Daniel's chest. Emily stood beside him without speaking, her presence anchoring him in a way he hadn't expected but no longer questioned. Then the decision came. The contract was void. The land returned. It happened without noise, without celebration, just words spoken into a room that suddenly felt too small to hold them. Daniel didn't move at first. He stood there, absorbing it, as if waiting for something to take it back. But nothing did. Max shifted closer, pressing lightly against his leg. Emily exhaled softly, the tension leaving her shoulders all at once. Outside, the sunlight seemed brighter than before, stretching wide across the open land beyond the courthouse steps. Daniel stepped into it slowly, like a man relearning how to stand in his own life. He turned. Emily stood just behind him, watching, not expecting anything, not asking. For a moment, Daniel said nothing. Words had never come easily to him, and this was more than words. "I don't want to do this alone," he said finally. It was simple. Honest. Enough. Emily held his gaze, searching, not for perfection, but for truth. Then she nodded once. "You won't have to." Max moved ahead of them as they walked, his stride lighter now, almost playful, as if he sensed the change, even if he didn't understand its meaning. Days later, they stood on the land again. The house was worn, the fields untended, the fences broken, but it was still there, waiting. Daniel stepped forward, his boots pressing into soil that felt both familiar and new. Emily followed, her presence no longer temporary, no longer uncertain. There was work ahead, hard work, the kind that didn't promise ease, only meaning. Max ran ahead into the open field, chasing the wind as if it were something alive, something worth catching. Daniel looked out across the land, then back at Emily. This time, when he reached for her hand, he didn't hesitate, and she didn't pull away. There are storms in life that don't just bring wind and rain. They take away trust, dignity, and the very place we once called home. And yet sometimes in the moment we feel most lost, a small door opens, quiet, unpromised, just warm enough for us to pause and begin again. This story doesn't claim life is always fair. It simply reminds us that there are still people who choose kindness even after they've been hurt. And sometimes what saves us isn't a grand miracle, but a simple hand reaching out at the right moment, or someone choosing to stay when they could have walked away. In everyday life, we may not lose an entire ranch, but all of us have lost something. Trust, opportunity, or someone we once held close. And maybe what matters most isn't how much we've lost, but whether we're still willing to believe again. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment. Your words might be the light someone else needs today. Share this with someone who could use a little hope. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. May God bless you, keep your heart strong in difficult days, and guide you toward better things, even when the road ahead still carries storms.